The vast majority of online publishing and communication platforms live within the United States of America. That's just the reality of the world. While there are several that exist in other countries, WeChat and Telegram are some notable examples. Facebook, Instagram, X, Substack, Locals, Rumble, YouTube. I mean, it goes on and on. The vast majority of some of the biggest platforms for publishing content online and communicating with people, both privately and in a public way or group settings, exist within the United States, which means what happens politically within the United States has a dramatic impact on those online publishing platforms. So today what we're going to talk about a little bit is distinctly very political, but I want everyone to bear this in mind from the point of view of the platforms we use for publishing electronic content, because that's really what I think is critically important here. Yesterday, Mark Zuckerberg sent a letter to Jim Jordan, who is the chairman of the Committee on the Judiciary in the United States House of Representatives. This is getting a lot of coverage in the mainstream news all over the place. This is going to cause a lot of political yelling back and forth, and it's all very exciting if you follow the political stuff. But I want to talk about it from the point of view of the platforms that we use. I am going to read some of this article to you now, some of this letter to you now, because I think it is incredibly important. Now, before we read this, I should say that some of the revelations from this letter aren't really that revelatory. We know that many of these online platforms censor content. We know that they've censored content about political things and medical things and all sorts of stuff. And we know from multiple sources, including from Zuckerberg himself from past interviews he did, including the 2022 interview with Joe Rogan, which is like 80 million hours long, that the US government has requested that Facebook censor much of this content. What's interesting about this letter is it an official, succinct, short statement of exactly what happened between the US government and Facebook, a statement of regret on behalf of Facebook and the CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, that he regrets what happened, and it is sent directly to the United States government officials in a very public way. And because of that, it makes it very easy to not just talk about this story for all the various journalists out there, but it makes it much easier for government officials to sit down and take action one way or the other based on it. So it's an important event. So I'm going to read this to you now. This is, again, from Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Meta, Facebook, Instagram, all that sort of thing. Chairman Jordan, I appreciate the committee's interest in content moderation on online platforms. As you are aware, Meta has produced thousands of documents as part of your investigation and made a dozen employees available for transcribed interviews. Further to our cooperation with your investigation, I welcome the opportunity to share what I've taken away from this process. Okay, all right. Here we go. There's a lot of talk right now around how the US government interacts with companies like Meta, and I want to be clear about our position. Our platforms are for everyone. We're about promoting speech and helping people connect in a safe and secure way. As part of this, we regularly hear from governments around the world and others with various concerns around public disclosure and public safety. Yada, 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 yada. He's puffing himself up here a little bit. But here's where it gets interesting. In 2021, senior officials from the Biden administration, including the White House, repeatedly pressured our teams for months to censor certain COVID-19 content, including humor and satire. It's crazy. And expressed a lot of frustration with our teams when we didn't agree. ultimately, it was our decision whether or not to take content down, and we own our decisions, including COVID-19 related changes we made to our enforcement in the wake of this pressure. I believe the government pressure was wrong, and I regret that we were not more outspoken about it. I also think we made some choices that, with the benefit of hindsight and new information, we wouldn't make today. I'm just going to keep reading. I have so many things I want to say, but I'm going to keep reading. Like I said to our teams at the time, I feel strongly that we should not compromise our content standards due to pressure from any administration in either direction. And we're ready to push back if something like this happens again. Okay. So, I mean, clearly we all are aware, regardless of what side of the political fence you're on, that there was a great deal of censorship on many platforms, including X when it was Twitter, before Elon purchased it, Facebook and other platforms. When people talked about anything COVID-19 related that deviated from what the approved narrative was, like whether it was medical treatments or vaccine questions or communication questions, any of it, if you deviated from the approved plan of what was okay to say, you got censored relatively quickly. I got censored a ton. Shoot, half of my friends and family got censored on Facebook or Twitter. I got my account deleted on Twitter for related things. And so it's really not a new concept. What's interesting here is that the CEO of Facebook is coming out and saying that he regrets that they did that, right? And he is making it very clear who was pressuring him to do it. It was the Biden administration, right? It is not coming in general from nebulous, the whole government. It's not coming from multiple political parties. It's coming from one political party, one administration. And I think that's very interesting. I'm going to continue here. In a separate situation, the FBI warned us about a potential Russian disinformation operation about the Biden family and Burisma in the lead up to the 2020 election. That fall, when we saw a New York Post story reporting on corruption allegations involving then Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden's family, we sent that story to fact checkers for review and temporarily demoted it. Temporarily. They censored it like crazy while waiting for a reply. It's since been made clear that the reporting was not Russian disinformation, and in retrospect, we shouldn't have demoted the story. We've changed our policies and processes to make sure this doesn't happen again. For instance, we no longer temporarily demote things in the U.S. while waiting for fact checkers. Well, I guess that's good. That seems like a tiny fraction of what needs to happen to resolve that. But I'm glad that they're making that statement of the government and government agencies at the direction and for the specific benefit of the Democratic Party and operatives of the Democratic Party specifically suppress the speech of United States citizens in online digital platforms, at least in this case, Facebook. I'm going to continue. I mean, this is important to know. I mean, we need to know who is controlling and moderating the platforms that we use. Like if we log into an IRC server, who's moderating that, right? It's important to know that. Like, does a government have control over our IRC server? And if so, I think a lot of people would not want to use that IRC server anymore. Does the government control what we say on Facebook? Well, at least for a certain period of time and for a number of topics, yes, 100%. I think that needs to be known and documented because a lot of us think of these online digital platforms as, sort of free speech places. But in all cases, there's a tremendous amount of censorship that does occur in a lot of different directions. And I'm going to touch on that in just a moment. But I think we need to understand who is it that controls all of the various online digital platforms? I'm going to continue with this letter. I'm just going to finish this up. Apart from content moderation, I want to address the contributions I made during the last presidential cycle to support electoral infrastructure. The idea here was to make sure local election jurisdictions across the country had the resources they needed to help vote safely during a global pandemic. I made these contributions through the Chan-Zuckerberg Initiative. They were designed to be nonpartisan, spread across the urban, rural, and suburban communities. Still, despite the analysis I've seen showing otherwise, I know that some people believe this work benefited one party over the other. My goal is to be neutral and not play a role one way or the other, or to even appear to be playing a role, so I don't plan on making a similar contribution this cycle. Respectfully, Mark Zuckerberg, founder, chairman, and CEO of Meta Platforms Incorporated. Okay. Fascinating. There are things that I like here and things that make me go, duh, and then there's a lot of stuff that causes conversation. So the thing that I like here, Mark Zuckerberg is taking some responsibility here. Now, obviously, he's talking about it in a way to try and make Meta and Facebook look good and pass the buck a little bit, and I don't love that. But he is flat out saying that he regrets having caved into the pressure from President Biden and the Biden-Harris administration in order to censor United States citizens. And he agrees that it turns out the things, at least some of the things he was censoring, turned out to be false. Turned out to not things that he was censoring because it was misinformation or Russian disinformation, turned out to not be disinformation, is what I'm saying. Like the Hunter Biden laptop story, right? He even agrees, yeah, okay, that was not Russian disinformation. The United States government, specifically at the direction of the Biden-Harris administration, lied, right? They lied knowingly and then put pressure on online platforms to censor U.S. citizens. And non-U.S. citizens. And the part that makes me happy here is, at least to some degree, this is a leader of one of those online platforms taking some level of responsibility. Right? It's nice to see. I would like to have seen more of this. I would like to have seen Zuckerberg do this a heck years earlier. He did talk a little bit about this during his 2022 Rogan podcast interview. But this letter and more should have happened years ago. And but just the same, it's nice to see that occurring. What's also nice is this brings to the surface the fact that many government agencies and one specific political party within the United States is putting very heavy pressure on online communication and online publishing platforms in order to control what information is allowed to be published, right? Can you publish information about COVID medications or thoughts on COVID vaccines? Well, most people could not. For years, that was not allowed and heavily, heavily censored, whether it was on Twitter, Facebook, or whatnot, or YouTube. I got censored off of YouTube. I had an episode I did with Ben Heck. I had Ben Heck on my show, and he made a couple of offhanded comments relating to COVID vaccines. And his comments were not technically incorrect. They were opinionated, but they were not technically incorrect. Just the same, because they were about COVID vaccines and they didn't exactly adhere to the approved narrative by the Biden-Harris administration, YouTube censored that show, took it off of YouTube entirely, issued a strike against my channel, and locked me out of the ability to upload future videos to YouTube for something like 90 days. Ridiculous, right? Those same sort of things happen to Facebook and everywhere else constantly, relatively constantly. And they're still happening is a thing. And so I like that Zuckerberg posted this letter. I'm not a huge Zuckerberg fan. I don't like Facebook. I don't like Instagram. I don't like Meta. I just don't. But I like that we have a CEO who's taking some responsibility, and my hope is that that spurs other leaders to take similar responsibility, and hopefully Zuckerberg sees the response from this and says, you know what? We need to be more pro freedom of speech. We need to be more resistant to pressure from the Democrat Party. And I keep saying the phrases, the Democrat Party and the Biden-Harris administration. And that's very, very deliberate because that's where the pressure is coming from, right? We're not seeing a huge amount of, at least not over this last several years, we're not seeing a huge amount of pressure, or public or otherwise, being exerted on X or Facebook or any other online platform where, say, members of the Libertarian or Green or Republican parties in the United States are pressuring these online platforms to censor content. But we are seeing members of the Democrat Party, many members of the Democrat Party, censoring or pushing these platforms to censor content that is specifically would be harmful to them politically, right? And it's a shame that we're seeing so many of these platforms caving into that pressure. And Mark Zuckerberg here says he regrets it. And I believe him. I take him at face value. Now, it may be that he regrets it because the backlash has continued to build. It may be that he regrets it because he legitimately had an enlightenment moment around it. I don't know. I don't know, Mark. But I do believe him that he has regrets over having allowed that pressure to force him to, or to convince him to censor things. Now, there are many platforms going on right now that are experiencing huge amounts of pressure from government organizations. The platform that I use, let's see, I don't have a screenshot up here at the moment, but I use Locals as my primary publishing platform. And the reason I do that is because their goals are to be somewhat resistant to that sort of pressure and censorship. But because of that, it means that my content is not easily accessible in countries like Brazil. If you go to lunduke.locals.com to read one of my articles or watch one of my shows or the like, you'll be greeted with a message that says, hey, sorry, person from Brazil, because the Brazilian government wants us to remove people and censor people, we're just not available in Brazil right now. And this is not an isolated incident. There are multiple platforms that are not available in Brazil right now. In fact, there are multiple platforms that are now not available in France and China and a wide variety of other countries because of censorship-related activities. And my guess is we're going to see more of that happening in more countries. The United Kingdom, for example, has a number of laws, and they're having a lot of internal conflict over it right now, where they're pushing for more and increasingly harsh penalties for saying the wrong things online, right? So misgender someone online, use their wrong pronoun, you might go to jail, right? You might get arrested. They're moving in that direction very rapidly. What happens when you have organizations, publishing platforms in the United States that we publish to, whether it's Substack, Locals, Rumble, YouTube, Twitter, X, Facebook's, Instagram, so many others. I mean, most of the big podcast aggregators are here in the United States. Apple, Spotify, all of it's here in the USA. What happens when, say, France and the UK and Brazil, they keep going in a more sensory happy direction, and those companies don't adequately cave into that censorship? Well, that means that entire platforms, entire online publishing platforms will cease to be available potentially in those countries. It's already happening to a certain degree, like Rumble and Locals trying to get them in various platforms. It's just going away. And this has a direct impact on my ability to reach an audience. This has a direct impact on my bottom line as a business. It becomes a real significant practical issue for online digital publishing. That's why we're kind of talking about this today, is not so much, ooh, Democrats bad. Yes, Democrats are the ones pushing for censorship of online platforms the most vehemently. Not only, I should make that very, very clear, there are ways that some of the more right-leaning governments and political parties are pushing for some types of censorship. But by and large, the political censorship, the COVID-19 censorship, that all tends to be coming from very left-leaning political parties in any major country. But when it comes down to it, since all of those online platforms are located in the United States, with just a handful of exceptions, what happens when if the United States gets under more control of the same people who have been pushing for more of the censorship, right? So right now, there are many organizations or many companies where you can have a somewhat censorship resistant, not proof, but resistant publishing experience. Locals, Rumble, X, and a few others, a Substack included, where they've done a pretty good job of saying, you know what, whatever your ideas, whatever your thoughts, you can publish here. Well, they're in the United States. And that means that, yes, like with Locals and Rumble and whatnot, you may not be available in Brazil, but the majority of the world, you will be able to publish your content to because you're currently in the USA. But what happens when, let's say the next general election hits in this coming November, and Vice President Harris wins that election? Well, she's part of the administration that Mark Zuckerberg is here talking about, regretting having let censor their platform and censor the truth, right? She specifically was part of the administration that censored the truth knowingly on all of these platforms. So what happens if at that election, the party that has been pushing censorship is now more in power? Right? What happens to all of these platforms then? What happens to Apple as a podcasting platform? What happens to Facebook, X, Substack? What happens to all of them? The reality is they have to adhere to the laws of the government. And the Biden-Harris administration already have shown that if they don't like you, they send SWAT teams, right, to arrest you. They send SWAT teams to storm your house. If you go to a political rally, you get arrested, and sometimes you get arrested and put in jail for years without even getting charged. And I know we're getting real political here, but I think that what I'm trying to get to is that we're in a position right now where the ability for these online publishing platforms to continue to publish in a free speechy way is tenuous at best. It is dangling by a thread. And that's the interesting thing here is there's not really an alternative. Now, many people will say, okay, well, then go to a decentralized, federated online publishing platform where it's more difficult for a centralized authority to censor you. Well, that's great in theory. In practice, what you end up with is the Fediverse or Mastodon, where people are censor happy and it's extremely political. In fact, you'll find that the Fediverse and Mastodon does not censor illegal content. They allow massive quantities of illegal content on some of the largest servers across the Fediverse. But they rapidly censor just simply having political opinions. For example, if people mention my name across several Fediverse servers, they get banned from those servers. I've heard of several people now who literally just posted a link to like one video or one podcast of mine or one article, and they got banned from entire servers. Now, it's not because they were spreading disinformation. I don't post disinformation. It's not because they were spreading hate speech. There was no hate speech there. It's not because they were they were posting anything illegal. I don't even like to swear in my in my shows or articles. But it's because the individuals who report to no one, who have no responsibility truly, simply have extreme political views and are very censor happy. I know there's 1,000 or so Mastodon and Fediverse servers out there, so you'll find a variety of different censor happiness going on all across it. But what you find is extreme censorship. I mean, extreme censorship, even more so than what you get on Facebook or X or really any of these other platforms. So as of right now, your options really and truly are you self-host entirely, like you self-host, or you are at the whims of what happens in the upcoming elections as to whether or not you will be allowed to simply talk about certain topics, because the powers that be might not like those topics. That is a little bit terrifying. As someone who is wordy for a living, what I do is I talk and I write and I put down ideas and I investigate and publish numbers, and the numbers I publish and the things that I talk about tend to make people who are politically leftist angry. They just do. Do I target that specifically? No. But it's just the way it is, at least right now. So what happens a few months from now if Vice President Harris wins the presidential election and let's say the Democrats take control of the House and the Senate? Now, I know this is getting real political, but I really want to think about this. And I want everyone to think about this from a practical perspective of online publishing and communication platforms. What happens then? Because those individuals, and I'm not trying to vilify them, I'm just saying that they have shown, and Mark Zuckerberg has documented it very well, as has Elon Musk and others. They have shown that they are not just willing to censor people who make them look bad politically, but they are eager to do it. And in some cases, they get frustrated and angry if platforms don't actively and quickly censor people like me. And in fact, Zuckerberg even calls out that they regularly seek to censor satire and humor. Satire and humor. It's craziness. It's craziness. And now, and the reason that this goes even further down a dark road for the tech industry is the vast majority, 95% plus of the tech news outlets and tech journalists out there are on the left of the political spectrum. They just are, right? It's again, that's not passing judgment on them. It's just saying the reality of the entire tech journalism segment. So if you want coverage of the tech industry, of big tech companies, of tech foundations and the like, you want it to be accurate and you want it to be honest, what you want is a whole bunch of journalists with all sorts of different political ideas, right? From all sides of it, right? You would not want every tech journalist to be very right-leaning. You wouldn't want that. You wouldn't want that. Nor every tech journalist to be very left-leaning. You wouldn't want that. It would be no good. But that's exactly what you have right now. If it's at the point, the Lunduke Journal is one of the only non-left-leaning tech journalism outlets out there. And we're able to publish our content because there are some platforms that allow it. Now, I would not feel comfortable using Facebook as my sole publishing platform for the Lunduke Journal because they slap down ideas that I publish very regularly. Just like I don't feel comfortable publishing to YouTube as my primary platform. I get banned off of YouTube every third Thursday, it seems like. Luckily, there are some platforms I can currently publish to, but if the political landscape changes in the United States, where all of these companies are founded and where the vast majority of the data centers are located, that might not be possible anymore. At which point, The only remaining points of view that will be allowed in the tech industry are those that ally themselves with the extreme left. That's just the truth. And you'd think, well, we don't need to get politics into the technology sphere. We don't need to get politics into computing. Unfortunately, the computer companies, the software and hardware companies, the online service companies, they do get political. Now, I would agree with you. I like to keep to the pure politics when possible. But the reason we're talking about this now is because Microsoft and IBM and Red Hat and the Linux Foundation and Mozilla and Wikipedia and all of them are extremely political organizations with publicly stated and privately stated extreme political goals. And you can see some of that when you look at the political donations from these major tech companies, which is like 90% in some cases towards the Democrat Party, right? It's just the way it is. So what happens when the Lunduke Journal can't publish, say, articles about Red Hat discriminating against Asian and white men anymore? I mean, what happens? Because I've been able to cover that. No other tech outlet has. And if I stop covering that, what happens? What happens when we can't cover the fact, like, and again, this is a very political topic, but Microsoft has been actively advocating for gender transitioning 3-year-olds of their employees. Like if they tell their employees, if you got a 3-year-old, they give them pamphlets and white papers and support groups and teams to help them gender transition their toddlers, right? Now, that's the thing is, that's illegal, right? That's a criminal act both at the federal level and reiterated in like 20 some odd states, right? I'm the only one reporting on this. Now, is it important that gets reported on? I think so. I think it's something that needs to be talked about, that Microsoft is spending Microsoft money doing that. If I'm not allowed to talk about that anymore, and if certain political parties have more power over these online publishing platforms than they do right now, I wouldn't be allowed to talk about that. In fact, I've gotten videos about that topic yanked off of YouTube. Did I lie? No. Did I encourage hate or violence against anyone? No. Did I simply quote Microsoft? Yes. And that got me banned off of YouTube. This was yet another time I got banned off of YouTube. So what happens? What happens in November if the election goes that way? Now, the Lunduke Journal is not going to come out, not ever, and say everyone needs to vote a particular way, right? But on the other hand, we have to be realistic here. There is one political party that is seeking desperately to censor people, censor political speech, censor scientific and medical speech, censor historical speech, censor gender identity speech, censor everything. And there are other political parties, many of them, that are not, right? And that's just the way it is. And I am deeply concerned if that one political party, notice I'm not endorsing a political party here. I'm just saying I'm concerned what if that one political party gains more control. That is concerning to me, because where am I going to publish? Even if I stop publishing, and this is not just me, but this is for all the major publishers out there. Even if I were to stop publishing on one of the other platforms like Locals or Rumble or Substack or X or wherever, and I went to self-hosting entirely, we have seen over the last 5 to 10 years many instances where DNS registrars have forbid organizations from having domain names. We have seen examples where ISPs and hosting companies have forbid platforms and outlets from hosting with them. That has happened repeatedly over the last 5+ years. And I tend to get yelled at a lot. So me self-hosting becomes a terrifying prospect. A lot of people ask why I don't self-host. This is one of the reasons why. In order for me to be able to actively publish the things that I publish, I kind of need the backing, legal and moral and otherwise, of an organization that's dedicated to freedom of expression, freedom of speech. But that might go away a little bit. The one spark of hope here for me is we see multiple examples, including this letter from Mark Zuckerberg, of all people, of organizations and CEOs fighting back, at least in small ways, against this censorship and pointing the finger at exactly who is pressuring for the censorship to occur, because it's one group of people, it is one political party, and they are continuing to do it. And now we're seeing people who have been historically allied with that organization, with that political party, standing up and saying, you know what, I regret hanging out with you. I regret censoring things because you asked it. And that gives me a great deal of hope, a spark of hope, more hope than I had before, that we will head in a decent direction there. But I'm hoping that people take notice of this. I'm hoping that people don't drop the topic, because this exact topic, in my opinion, more than almost anything, is going to dictate what the next several years of the world looks like. Because we could head towards a brand new era of freedom of speech, or we could head towards an era where the majority of online platforms are cracked down on and censored like never before. We need to think about this. We need to think about this a lot. I'm going to get yelled at for this video, because it was not exactly a pro-Democrat video, and it was a very political video. It was a very political podcast. I know that. I know that, but this sort of topic must be talked about. And for anyone out there who is a Democrat, I'm not mad at you. In fact, I don't even think less of you. But I think that I was a Democrat. I was a Democrat until not that many years ago. So I understand how many of you feel right now. But I think we need to, as nerds, as people who were excited when BBSs came around and the internet came around and Usenet and IRC and all these different digital publishing platforms hit, and all of us were excited about them, and all of us experimented for them and embraced them. And part of what made us so excited for them was the ability to publish our ideas without a corporate overlord telling us what to say, without a government telling us what we could or couldn't say. We got the word out there. And now it's changing. Now we're at a point where that is being taken away from us if we vote a particular way. And it just is, right? I'm not saying that Democrats are all bad or that Democratic policies are all bad, nor am I saying you can't vote for a Democrat. But I think we need to go into this eyes open and know that we're probably going to see more of the stuff that Zuckerberg says he deeply regrets if we keep the same people who forced those things to happen in power or give them additional power. It's concerning. So yell at me, feel free. Oh my gosh, Lunduke, you got to stop talking about politics. Stick to the pure tech. I'll stick to the tech when the tech companies and the politics stay out of my tech. Like when they stop forcing political stuff into my tech, I'll stop talking about it. I like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. If you come around, take a banana and slam it into my peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, I'm going to spend my time complaining about how much I don't want to eat a peanut butter, jelly, and banana sandwich. And you could say, Lunduke, I don't like that you're talking about bananas all the time. And then if you keep coming around and slamming bananas into everything I eat, oh, you got a pizza there, Lunduke? Banana. And you get upset because I keep talking about bananas. Lunduke, why you keep talking about bananas? And then you shove a banana in my face. I'm going to keep talking about bananas until you stop shoving the bananas in my face. This is what we're dealing with here. I want to talk about computers. And I've talked about this before. If I don't have any political related topics that I need to talk about, awesome. Awesome. I'm going to talk about DOS. I'm going to talk about RS-232 ports. I'm going to talk about how the SCSI needs to make a resurgence because doggone it, I miss having SCSI drives. I'm going to talk about those nonstop. But we need to take care of the things that are making it so we need to take care of all the political stuff that's being shoved into our face and shoved into our computers and shoved into our software and making it so we're not allowed to talk about things. Ruining the internet. We need to talk about that stuff. So, anyone who's upset at me talking about these things, sorry. But they keep putting a banana on my pizza. Thank you to everyone who makes the Lunduke Journal possible. Thank you for allowing me to talk about whatever I want to talk about. The important things that need to be talked about. All because you support the Lunduke Journal, lunduke.com, lunduke.locals.com. I couldn't do it without you. We don't take any money from any company, from any advertising broker or nothing. 100% supported by subscribers like you. I get to say whatever I want. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, nerds and nerdettes across the inner tubes, I do declare, end broadcast.